Hey guys, welcome to my channel. My name is Daisy. Today I will be reading my subscribers' spooky stories, so grab your snacks, grab your cobija, and let's get straight into it. Hi Daisy. This may be a little long, but I think this is definitely a story you'd love to tell. My daughter Elena encouraged me to write to you again and share my demon story. I worked a lot of jobs, and at this time, I needed to start working nights, so I picked up a janitorial gig at a local theater. I worked with a crew of 6 to 10 people, cleaning each theater, the concession stands, and the restrooms. I started noticing strange things about a month into working there. One night, I was cleaning the popcorn machines and saw one of my coworkers walking to the other end of the concession stand. The only problem was, she wasn't even scheduled to work that night. She stopped at the end of the concession area, turned around in my peripheral vision, and started waving. But when I looked directly at her, she was gone. I asked another coworker if she had come in to cover for someone, and they said no. Concerned, I called her because she was around 65, 70 years old, and I was worried something might have happened to her. Thankfully, she answered and she said she was fine. Later on, I became a shift lead. One night, a guy on the team radioed me and asked where I was. I told him I was in the restrooms on the west side of the building. He responded, "Why are you messing with me?" Confused, I asked him what he meant. He said, "I'll come to you." When he got to the restrooms where I was cleaning with another coworker, he looked uneasy. He asked, "Why do you keep waving at me to go into the theater and then disappearing?" I told him that wasn't possible. I had been in the restrooms the entire time. He swore he saw me in a completely different part of the building. We often talked about ghosts and paranormal stuff, and one day the topic of Ouija boards came up. I told them I don't mess with that stuff. A few weeks later, I took a week off to visit my family. During that time, one of my coworkers called me and said things had been getting really weird. I asked him what he meant. He said the activity had picked up. He told me that while he was vacuuming the steps, he felt like someone rushed him, causing him to fall. Another guy said he kept feeling his shirt being tugged and was seeing shadows. Then there was a time they were filling mop buckets, and the mops were suddenly thrown to the ground. They knew I was the only one who would believe them because management would have thought they were crazy. When I got back, it was my first night back on shift. The guys pulled me aside and said they needed to show me something. One of them handed me his phone, and on the screen was a photo of smoke on the ceiling with a face in it, and it wasn't a normal face. Then they confessed, "We used an Ouija board while you were gone." Well, fast forward. The guys went to the store for lunch, and I stayed behind. One of them said, "Hey, I'm going to leave a recorder running in one of the theaters." I told them that was fine and took a nap during my break. When they got back, they started reviewing the recording. You could hear a low, growling voice, and faintly, a woman screaming. We were shook. Well, a few nights later, my coworker August and I were in the biggest theater, cleaning the stairs and vacuuming. I was on the third step. Each step was about 2 feet long, and I had one headphone in. Suddenly, I heard a grunt beside me. I turned my head and froze. There was something crouched beside me. Its skin was gray, and its eyes were dark and hollow. It had long fingernails curled over the stairwell. I shouted for August, and he immediately saw it too. He cussed loudly as I jumped back, leaving all my equipment behind. We only had one way out. The theater was designed with 2 stairways that led to a single exit into the lobby. We had no choice but to run down the opposite side, praying this thing wouldn't cut us off. We radioed the rest of the crew, and they came running. We met them outside the theater and breathlessly told them what we saw. One guy brushed it off and said, "Man, it's just your imagination." He went into the theater, mocking whatever it was. We told him not to mess around, but he didn't listen. A few minutes later, he came back out and the color had completely drained from his face. He asked, "Did that thing have a tail?" I told him I didn't know. I wasn't sticking around to find out. After that, we all decided to leave. Luckily, most of our work was done. Eventually, I ended up quitting that job because things started following me home. Thanks for reading. Larissa. I'd like to share a story that happened to my brother. We live in Arizona on a farm, and our nearest neighbor is 10 miles away. For some backstory, ever since I was a child, I spent a lot of time at my grandmother's house because I was like her little shadow. When I was a teenager, there was a period of a few months when a man would often come around to help my grandmother with outdoor chores when the men in my family were away. For the sake of this story, I'll call him Roger. I was never formally introduced to him, but from the moment I saw him, I kept my distance. Something about him made me uneasy. It was like my stomach turned upside down every time he was around. One morning, I remember him knocking on my grandmother's front door. She let him inside, and since she was cooking breakfast, he sat in the kitchen chatting with her. I kept my eyes on him the whole time, convinced something wasn't right. He never looked in my direction or said a single word to me. One summer Saturday night, my brother asked my aunt to drive him to this man's house because he had left his keys at my grandmother's. The property didn't have much lighting, but when they arrived, my brother noticed a truck parked in the driveway. He knocked on the door, but no one answered. My aunt had left the car running, and the headlights illuminated the front of the house. Suddenly, loud barking erupted from the backyard. Curious, my brother asked my aunt to shine the car's headlights towards the back. She drove to the side of the house, distracted by her phone as she checked messages. In the backyard, my brother saw a corral, half full of sheep. The sheep and dogs were causing a huge commotion, and when he looked closer, he saw something that made his heart stop. In the middle of the corral, he witnessed a horse shape-shifting back into a human. It was the man who had been helping my grandmother. For a moment, my brother thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, but when he realized what he was seeing was real, panic set in. He ran back to the front yard, threw the keys at the front door, and jumped into my aunt's car, yelling for her to drive as fast as possible. Startled, my aunt asked what was wrong. My brother didn't answer right away. Instead, he kept looking out the window, making sure nothing was following them. He told her he'd explain everything once they got home. When they arrived at my grandmother's house, both of them ran inside. Shortly after, they heard dogs barking outside. My aunt explained to my grandmother that my brother had seen something strange and had waited until they got home to tell the full story. When my brother described what he saw, my grandmother calmly told them that the barking dogs confirmed what he had witnessed. She urged them to stay calm and not go outside for the rest of the night. After that day, we never saw him again. I had a strong feeling something was off with that man from the moment I saw him. Hi, my name is Clarissa. At the time of this story, I was a junior in high school, around 17 years old. I was a polite girl who loved wearing band tees, cute skirts, and slip-on Vans 24/7. I was like into mysterious skater dudes at the time. Yeah, I know. Who wasn't? LOL. I had started talking to a boy I liked. Let's call him Chris. He was one of those guys who would draw on his arm with Sharpies to mimic having tattoos. One day, I stupidly told him to draw on my arm. Of course, he obliged and started drawing a circle with a star in the middle. I instantly knew what that marking was, but shrugged it off. saying how cool it looked. I thanked him and we kept chatting until the end of the school day. When my grandma picked me up from school, I waved goodbye, gave Chris a hug, and left. The rest of my day went on as usual. When my grandma noticed the marking on my arm, she gave me a look and asked why I had it. I casually said, "Oh, some boy did that, but it's dumb, so I'll scrub it off later in the shower." She just nodded, but I could tell she wasn't thrilled. Later that night, I took a shower, but for some reason, I forgot to wash off the marking. I got ready for bed as usual and fell asleep quickly. Suddenly, I woke up in the middle of the night, completely unable to move. I instantly knew I was experiencing sleep paralysis. I couldn't talk or move a single muscle. I could only look around the room. That's when I saw it. A dark figure came through my bedroom door. It turned slightly to the right and stopped at the foot of my bed, facing me. I tried to scream, to call for my grandma or grandpa, but no words came out. I was screaming internally, terrified beyond belief. In my mind, I started praying to God and repeating, "Leave me alone," over and over again. Suddenly, the figure flew over me, and just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I could finally move again, but I didn't want to wake my grandparents, so I stayed in bed, paralyzed with fear for what felt like an eternity. After about 30 minutes, I worked up the courage to turn on the light. I stayed awake as long as I could, but eventually dozed off. When I woke up to my alarm, I bolted out of bed and ran to the bathroom. I scrubbed that marking off my arm until my skin turned bright red and there was no trace of Sharpie left. I didn't tell my grandparents what had happened. Instead, I held it in until I saw my friends at school that morning. When I told them, they were just as freaked out as I was. Thankfully, I haven't experienced anything like that since high school, and I hope it stays that way. Now, I live out of state with my boyfriend, 9 years graduated from high school. But one thing's for sure, I'll never let anyone write on my arm again. And to Chris, who decided to draw that specific marking on me, I hope you never did that to anyone else. My name is Melanie, and I live in Canada. This experience happened to me about 9 years ago. It wasn't a great time in my life or my family's. My mom had recently separated from my dad, and my mom, my 2 siblings, and I moved to another part of the city, into a small 3-bedroom duplex. Adjusting was difficult, but we made it work. Since there were 4 of us, my mom told me I could sleep in her bedroom while she slept in the living room. For a while, it was fine, but the new place always gave me a negative feeling, and I couldn't figure out why. My mom and sister would tell me it was probably because of all the recent changes in our lives, and that it would take time to adjust. I didn't disagree. We had been through a lot as a family, and now we were in a new home, so it made sense that I was feeling anxious. Still, the duplex had this eerie feeling I couldn't shake. Even the smell of the house made me uneasy. It wasn't a bad smell, just old and unfamiliar. Something about it just didn't feel right, and my feelings were confirmed on one particular night. It was late September or early October. The evenings had started to cool down, and I liked keeping the window open by the fire escape because the crisp air helped me sleep. I left the TV on for background noise, got comfortable, and eventually dozed off. All I remember is waking up in sheer panic. I couldn't move. I was completely paralyzed and breathing heavily. I shifted my gaze to the TV, which was now showing static, and then slowly moving my eyes to the end of the bed and past it to a small wooden cupboard closet. That's when I saw her. She had long, black hair covering her face. Her head tilted down. Her skin appeared gray and pale. She wore a white dress with frills along the trimmings. The sleeves reached her elbows, and the dress looked weathered and worn out. It resembled a nightgown from the 1800s. She didn't look at me or say anything, but the fear I felt was like nothing I had ever experienced in my life. I tried to scream for help, but nothing came out. I had no voice. I tried to move, but it felt like gravity was pulling me deeper into the mattress. The only thing I could think to do was silently pray. I repeated the Our Father over and over in my head, and I also thought of Archangel Michael and begged for his protection. At some point, I must have fallen asleep, though I don't remember when. I just remember waking up the next morning. I could move, I could talk, but I felt this overwhelming sense of unease. I glanced at the TV, and as soon as I saw it was still on static, I felt goosebumps rush from the back of my neck all the way down my spine. It took me a few days to process what had happened. Eventually, I gathered the courage to tell my mom about what I saw in her bedroom. She listened quietly and didn't say anything right away. Then, she took a deep breath and asked me, "Did you talk to your father about the girl in the white dress?" I was confused. I responded, "No, why?" She looked tense, but finally told me, "Because he saw the same girl in the closet in our bedroom at our old house." After that, I never spoke about my experience again. Not to my mom, not to anyone in my family. To this day, just thinking about what I saw makes me anxious and terrified, knowing that my dad had seen the same thing and never talked about it before or after makes it even worse. I'm too afraid to open a door that I can't close, so I've stayed silent about it. This is the one and only time I'll ever talk about the girl in the white dress. So that was it for today's video. Thank you for watching, and thank you everyone that shares their spooky stories. I appreciate you guys so much. We love hearing your guys' stories. It makes me so happy when you guys say that you guys are finally going to send in a story. I love that. It doesn't matter how short, how long, we appreciate it regardless. So please keep them coming. Send it in at daicyspooks@gmail.com. Of course, if you like to share, it's for all of us to hear. We will very much appreciate it. But I hope you guys are doing all amazing, and I hope to see you guys all in my next one. Bye.